Hello, and thank you for attending the first in the new basic training series. My name is Darren Black, and I'll be your trainer for today's session. As promised, in much of the mailers that went out and everything else for today's session, there are not going to be any marketing slides up front, basically just an architectural diagram so that you can get a feel for what it is that we're trying to accomplish in today's session, and then we'll jump right into it. So let's take a look at our goal for today. Again, these are basic training sessions. So what we want to do is introduce ideas and concepts. Many of them in future sessions will be fairly specific to one type of thing that you're looking to accomplish using XAware. This one is going to cover more of a couple of topics, really, kind of introducing you to the concept of data chaining and how you can use biz components to access various data sources. In this case, we're calling that a composite service. So getting data from multiple data sources and using data from any of those sources as input parameters, if you will, into subsequent requests. So we kind of want to introduce those topics to you today and hopefully give you an understanding of how that can be accomplished. As you can hopefully see on the architectural diagram slide here, we will be accessing information, and again, I kind of tailored today's session fairly quick to retrieve data from a flat file in a comma-separated format. And most people have dealt with that, so they have a pretty firm understanding of what's possible there. So that will be our first data source. And our second data source is actually going to be a relational database. And the idea of this is that we will get records from our flat file information, and for each of those records, we will then make a subsequent request out to the relational system to get additional information for each of those records retrieved from the flat file. So the architectural diagram, if you will, is slightly flawed in that we have a biz document that calls two separate biz components, and what we're actually going to do in today's exercise, as I modified it slightly, is we'll have that top biz component that goes out to the flat file. We're actually going to nest the other biz component underneath that one as a request for each of those other records. And you'll see that as we go through the session today. One of the prerequisites for these basic training sessions is that we hope you have gone out to XAware.org and taken a look at some of the tutorials and some of the white papers, etc., to be able to have a feel for the various features and components that are going to make an XAware service work. The three that you see on your screen here, primarily biz documents, biz components, and biz drivers, are what we're going to be focusing on today. I hope you have a little bit of an understanding of what each of those are. I'll take 30 seconds here just very quickly to kind of cover that. A biz document is kind of the orchestration layer, if you will, of what we want to have happen during the context of this service. The biz components are each kind of a unit of work. So go out to this data source or take this data and manipulate it in some fashion, if you will. And then biz drivers are used to actually connect us to, it's the piece that physically connects us to that data source, if you will. So that's kind of a very high-level understanding of those pieces. Again, no marketing stuff here, so straight on into Designer. The goal, again, the title, if you will, of the session today, Composite Data Services Exposed. We're going to create composite data service going out to that flat file, going out to a relational system, and then at the end of this, we're actually going to package that up and push it out to our XAware server, which allows it to immediately become available as a service, accessible as long as people have access to your server. They can get that. One other thing that we'll do is we'll go ahead and expose that as a web service today, just so that you can see how easy this is to do. The idea of these sessions is to keep them under a half an hour. So hopefully I'm not actually going to take the whole half an hour. I'll try and press on through here with these ideas as we go and show you a couple of things, the new features, if you will. I'm actually doing today's session on our release candidate. This is due to be released. The 5.1 release of XAware is set to come out here in another week or so. And We'll kind of highlight some of the features as we go through XAware 5.1 that I'm actually using today that might make you want to get it if you're using an older version, and or if you haven't downloaded it yet, why you would want to download it. There's some pretty cool features in here. So this is the XAware Designer, the place where you're going to create these services. I've taken the liberty of creating a project for us. You simply do that by right-clicking out here in the Project Navigator, New Project, and then selecting an XA Designer project. I've titled mine appropriately Basic Training 1, the first in the series of these basic training sessions. And I've taken the liberty again of creating a couple of files that we'll be using for today's demonstration. Our customer CSV file, if you will, I'll take that and bring that into view here very quickly just so that we can see it. You can see that over here in the main editor section, I've now opened that file. We have a header row that defines the elements of this CSV file, if you will, and then the actual data down underneath. So that's what our CSV file looks like. I've taken, again, the liberty of creating a couple of files here, the account list XML and then a customer XML. I can go any way during the context of this. I'll show you what I'm going to use those for. The first thing that we want to do is create that biz document that we're going to start as our service. There's a couple of ways of doing this. Recently out on our forums, there have been several discussions on, okay, how do I start? You know, some folks have a schema that they're looking to work with. Some folks have an XML file that they're looking to start with. And how can you do that? I'll show you very quickly how you could use both of those approaches. So again, under schemas here, I have something that I've called account list schema. If I wanted to create a biz document from that schema, I can simply right-click on that, come down to Generate, and select a biz document. I'll walk you through the process here just so that you can see it very quickly. It's going to create for us something called Account List 1 XBD, and rather than in the Schemas folder, I'll have it do that for us right out here at the root of the project. And I'll click on Next. It sees that the root element is the only element that's supportable as a root element for that schema is called Customer List. I'll create a couple of things here for us automatically, like our response type. Any namespace information would be controllable here. In this case, we don't have any. I'll click on Next. We've got a couple of options here. Again, this is a basic training, so I don't want to drill down in and give you all the details of each of these things. But again, just give you some very high-level concepts of how you can begin these processes. At this point, I could actually add a biz component call. If I knew what my first biz component would be, I could check that box here and then select from our list of biz component types here that we have wizard-driven interfaces for and what element I would want that to begin on. In this case, I'll just go ahead and finish out, and we can see that it has created our biz document for us with the appropriate elemental structure, if you will, customer list, and then we have the customer information and account list information. So our customer information is what's going to be coming from our flat file, comma-separated format. And then our account information is what we're going to get for each customer record that we retrieve from that flat file, given the customer ID. So that would be the way that you could actually start the process, starting with a schema. Again, out there on the forums, many people have come back and said, I don't have a schema. How do I start? So in this case, what I've done is I've just created essentially the same type of thing out here, the account list XML, and I'll show you how to interject that. So using the Create New Biz Doc here, again, you could do this in several different ways by right-clicking out here and creating New Biz Document, or from the toolbar. Up here, I'll click on the icon, the three little gears, Create New Biz Document. This launches us into that same type of process. What folder do you want this biz document to be created in? I'm just going to create it out there at the top level, and I'm going to go ahead and call this Customer List XBD. And I'll click on Next. I don't want to link it to a schema. I could. If I wanted to link it back out there to that account list schema, I could very well do that. But in this case, we're going fairly basic, so I'll leave it at that. A couple of options here, creating a default error handler for us. It's a good thing to have in case we do encounter any errors. It will handle them for us. I'm going to change my root element from document to call it customer list. There we go. And I've already got a basic description in there, if you will. I can modify that. It will save it from previous versions in case you're doing multiple types of things. And again, I could also add a biz component call. I'm not going to do that in this case just because I want to show you how to build this from scratch. In many cases, you have an idea of where you're going. You could actually do that before you finish out here. All right, so there is a basic biz document at this point. It has our root element called customer list, and down here it created an element for us. And what I want to do at this point is actually interject the account list XML file. So again, this has all of the same, essentially the same XML that we saw when I generated it from the schema. So what I want to do is I want to come out here, and I'll click in this case I've clicked on the element, and I'm going to insert XML. I can choose before, after, or as a child. I'll go ahead and insert it after. Okay, my type is XML down here, and if I open this up, I should see right there my account list XML. So I'll go ahead and select that, click OK. Now you can see I've got that customer XML and the account list XML interjected in there. And I can go ahead and remove the element. I'm not going to need it, so I'll just right-click and click on Delete Node. And at this point, I now have a customer list biz document. Go ahead and save that. That should look fairly similar to what we created from the schema. The only thing that we don't have is obviously the ties back to the schema to know what types of data the fields, each of these specific fields might be. But essentially, that's the two ways of going about this. And again, we could also just create the XML structure from scratch if we wanted to. Create that basic biz document and then begin adding individual elements if you want to. All right, let's jump off into the process. The first thing that we wanted to do again is to go out to that flat file and start getting our customer information returned here. So again, several ways to do that. If we would have selected during that wizard-driven process to create the biz document, I could have selected a file biz component and had it start on the element just for example. If I would have done that, it would have immediately, as soon as it created this biz document for us, it would have immediately taken us off into the wizard-driven process for our file biz component, very similar to what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use the palette, so I'll just go ahead and expand our biz component types here. And from that, I'm going to select a file biz component. I'll simply drag and drop that right over here onto my customer element where I want to start getting data back. I'll select drop on, and it launches us off into the wizard-driven process for our file biz component. The first thing that we would want to do is define the interface. Again, basic training, I'm not going to take you through this, but in many of the scenarios, typical implementations, we would do things like actually parameterize the file name and pass that all the way down into our biz driver so that you could pass a file name in either from a configuration file or as an input parameter, allowing you to easily, without modifying the structure of the service itself, allowing you to modify the input that would be consumed by this service. So in this case, we're going to get customer data from a CSV file. High-level overview of what this biz component is doing. I'll click on Next to move us to the second step in the process, which is creating our biz driver. So I have the option of using an existing biz driver. If I would have one out there that I know accesses the data source that I want, I could reuse that. In this case, I'm going to create one. Again, the idea here is to give you the concept of creating everything from scratch at a very high level. So I'm going to simply put a backslash on there and type in read file. Works as good as any other name for me. Again, you want to try and name things somewhat informatively, if you will, so that you can understand what they might be doing in the future. And then down here again, I'm going to go select the actual file that we want. I'm going to change my file type from text so that I can actually go locate that customer CSV file, the one that we're going to use and consume as our input for this. Our request type is read. Of course, you can see that we can read, write, and append if we wanted to do so. And this, again, I could put a description in here. I'll just forego that for now. We know what we're doing from the previous description, and in fact, we're accessing the customer CSV file. Go ahead and click on Next, and we're in the File Information step in the wizard at this point. Again, we can see the different types of records up here that we can consume, either fixed length or delimited. This is actually a delimited file, comma separated, if you will. And then I've got some additional parameters. These are fairly new, new in the 5.1 series, if you will. The file includes a header line. We know that it does. We took a quick look at that. Again, you have the option if you have a header line and then some comments. So line 2 and 3 are comments. You could actually say that my data starts on line 3, so you can accommodate that. I'll go ahead and check the box here for auto-detect field names and separator, and then we'll browse for that sample file name. And again, I'll change my file type down here to all files and go locate that customer CSV file again. And there we go. It's brought that in, and it has automatically detected that we have our header row. It sees that our field separator is a comma. It's correctly identified that. It has counted that we actually have 9 fields per record, and that our data is beginning on line 2. So that's all good. We'll go ahead and click on Next, and that's mapping our result. Okay? Because I started with our customer XML out there, that has actually become our target. So that XML there has become our target information. And our fields that it has found here, it's using our header names for the fields that we're going to map. I'll show you some of the features of this mapping screen that's consistent throughout many of the Biz Component wizard-driven processes. Things like auto-generate. We could actually have it generate the XML over here using these column names, if you will. Or in this case, since I have an XML structure that I'm looking to conform to, I'll just go ahead and click on Auto Map. And we'll see if any of those will actually map. So it does a little bit of heuristic testing here to try and find things like type and has auto mapped those for us. It's also gotten for us city, state, and zip code. So again, you can see some of the features here, like as I hover over type, on the source side over here, it's actually bolded that so that we know what that is mapped to. And again, if I hover over here, you'll see the inverse over on the right-hand side. It will select that and bold it. You have some options here, things like find next mapped element, so that if you did have one of these source columns mapped to multiple elements, you can actually step through those and see where it's mapped in all of your hierarchy over here. Now we need to look at the fields that it didn't get. Of course, our account information down here, it didn't have anything for, so nothing mapped in there, but things like customer ID, it didn't map to cust ID, so we'll just simply drag that over and drop it. And then our names, of course, first name didn't necessarily map tightly enough over here to these, so we'll just simply do those mappings here as well. One of the things that I'll show you in kind of the context of a basic training session is that you can do data transformations at this point as well. You can apply things called functoids, and again, we'll have a basic training session coming up here shortly on functoids, how you can add your own, how to use the existing ones that we have, and what some of the things that you can do with those are. But you could do any types of transformations there. We can also do lookup types of things. If this is equal to this, then change that value to that, if you will. Lots of different possibilities here for actually manipulating the data. If I wanted to, just very quickly, and this is a pretty neat feature that we've got in here as well, let's say over here in my target, it's not, but let's say that it actually had a full name here rather than first, mid, and last. If I wanted to concatenate these, just for example, let's take last name. I'm going to put middle name right over there on top of it. So if I drag middle name onto something that's already been mapped, it's going to ask me, did you want to append them, replace them, or cancel that mapping? If I select append, then it simply appends it to that. I can click over here and I can edit that, so if I wanted a comma between my last name and middle name, I could actually insert that comma and a space and format it in that fashion. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and undo that. We actually have fields that we're mapping to, and everything is working as we expected here. So we see the fields that it's auto-mapped in red for us, the ones that we've done manually in purple. We've got all of our fields mapped here except for street. See that it is still black, so I'll go ahead and map my street over to address. And at that point, I've got my mappings done for my customer data. Go ahead and click on Finish and give this biz component a name, and it's Get Customer Data. All right, doesn't require any input because we're getting our data from that comma-separated file. Go ahead and click on OK. And we now see our biz document and our biz component that's going to get that data. At this point, I'm going to run it very quickly just to make sure that we're getting our customer data. So we'll go ahead and execute that. And down here in my execution results, we should see that data coming back here for our customer. Again, the thing that we haven't done is our account information. So let's very quickly go out. Excuse me for just a second. Let's very quickly go out here and create a SQL biz component as a child of our get customer data, so that for each of these account numbers here, or customer IDs, we can get the corresponding banking information. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll come back up here out of my execution results, and what we want to do to data chain is actually go back over into our get customer data biz component. And we'll find here in our response that XML that's being generated, the mappings that we completed during that wizard-driven process, and then account list down here, the section that we haven't done anything with. So for each account that this customer has, let's go get that data. Again, I'm going to select the account element, and then over here in my palette, select a SQL biz component, and I'm going to drag that right over onto my account. Drop that on there, and it launches us into the wizard-driven process for creating a SQL biz component. Again, I'll create my driver here very quickly, which is the first step, and I'll call it account. And our login for that, any parameters that you might need. I'm going to change my protocol here a little bit to be HSQL and then ://localhost, and account is my database. So at that point, it's going to create a new biz driver for me called account, allowing me to connect to my hypersonic database out here called account. If I click on next and everything works, we're connected to that database. Otherwise, you would see an error right there saying invalid user ID and passwords, whatever combination of something that it doesn't like. Looks like I've gotten everything correct. I do, in this case, want to create an input parameter, which is our customer ID. So I'll go ahead and click New here on the interface and call this Cust ID. I've done one of those before, so it comes up there in that list of things for me. It also knew that it was of a type int. Typically, these will come up the first time that you do this as a string, but you can just type an I in that field, and it will go down to int and select that for us. Again, because I had done this previously, it sees my description is there, and whether we want to require this as something that needs to be passed into this biz component for it to work correctly. I'll click on OK. We'll see that there. Again, typically I would enter a description here, but I'm just going to forego that as we're trying to get through this example. And now we'll go ahead and add in our account table to this. And I'm going to add one more table in there, which is our account type. Do a little bit of database magic here. I know that my type over here actually is the ID for this table over here. So I'm going to join on those two simply by dragging type over onto ID, and you can see that those are joined now. And now I want to select my account ID from here. I want to select my customer ID so that I can use that in my criteria, my where clause. I want to select my description from over here, and then I'll do a shift click to actually select the rest of the data from this table over here. As we were doing that, it was adding those down here in the bottom section of this. So now I want to create my criteria, my where clause, where customer ID is equal to the input parameter that we created called cust ID. And I don't want that to show up as something that I want to map in my query, so I'll just go ahead and uncheck the show button there. And at this point, we can build that. Take a look at our query. If we wanted to modify the query, we could do so here. You can also go back to the design view and do that graphically. Okay? I'll go ahead and click on Next, and we can see our input parameter here. We can also see all of the columns that we just selected from that database. And again, for time's sake, we'll auto-map as many of those as we can. Got quite a few of them there. The only thing that we need to map is our account ID, so I'll drag that over and drop it, and our description over to type. Finish that out, and we'll call this biz component get account data. There we go. All right, we see that we created an input parameter here. I'm going to click it and then click on Edit so that I can give it the path to the customer ID that we're retrieving from our flat file. So I'll click the path button there, and then in our path browser, I'll select that structure that's in our response from our first biz component, select the customer ID, and then tell it that give me a relative path to that through the XML. So it creates an XPath reference to that. Click OK. Click OK again, and now we've got that value associated with that input parameter. I'll click on OK here, and now we've got our get account data biz component that's data chained out of our first biz component. So you can see that here now, where the account XML used to be, has been replaced with a call to the biz component that's now going to generate that. And there's our input data being passed into that. I'll go ahead and save everything here and then run our biz documents again. And let's take a look at our results. And there we go. So for Allison Jackson, we can verify our account, our customer ID, 710025. Was actually tied correctly into that. Now there's a little bit of additional information here because it's the account ID coming from the database, and it also helps us to identify that this is her checking account, and the subsequent down here is her savings account. So we can see that information, and again, it's happened for each of the records that we retrieved from that flat file. So our application looks like it's doing what we want it to do, our service that we've created here. At this point, we've created our composite data service. I've got about 3 minutes left, so without much ado, I'm going to show you how to create it as a service and get it out there onto the server. So what I want to do is I want to select my customer list biz document, right-click on it, and I'm going to use something called the package assembly tool. The only thing that I want to add here is my actual CSV file because I told it to use that rather than passing it in as a parameter. I'll go ahead and add that into my XAware file that we're creating here called customer list. Go ahead and create that package. See that it's been created successfully, and I can go ahead and deploy that to my server that's running out here in the background. I see that it has been deployed successfully, and I can immediately then test over here on the Test tab. No input parameters for this one, so I can simply invoke, and there we go. We see the box popping up, and my data is now exposed as a service. You can immediately hit this using a servlet call. So anyone that has access to my XAI server or my server right now can actually hit that. In this case, what we want to do is expose it as a web service as well. One final step, I'll go ahead and close this out, and again we can see the customer list XAR file here that we just created. I will right-click on that and make WSDL from archive. Create a service in a new WSDL. I'll go ahead and select the biz document. We could have multiple biz documents in one WSDL file, and I'll go ahead and give it a service name of customer list and make the WSDL. There we go. I could add it to the archive if I wanted to, just so that I can easily package that whole thing and pass it around. Our WSDL pops open out here so that we can actually look at it. The last thing that I'll do for you is actually execute that so that we can see it. So I'll right-click on my WSDL, And from Web Services, I'll test with Web Services Explorer. Takes it just a second to pop up here. And then we can actually run the request and see that we've actually executed it over the SOAP connector as well. There we go. Go ahead and double-click that to maximize it in the view. And I'll just go ahead and click on Go. So select our service that we want to run and then click on Go. It's going to execute it from our server. And down here in the status, we can actually see our data coming back here, having been executed across the SOAP connector. And if we wanted to view the source of that, we could actually see the request envelope and the response envelope containing our data. So that is very quickly how you would create a composite data service and expose it out there. I'll take you back over here very quickly and wrap things up, letting you know that if you have friends that were unable to attend today's basic training session, this will be made available on XAware.com or XAware.org, and you can go out there, get it, view it, review it if you want to do that. I hope you found today's training session educational and somewhat useful. We'll have future sessions available out there on XAware.org as well. And we would love to get some feedback from you about this series, how we can improve it, and what topics that you would like to see in future basic training sessions. So thank you for attending today, and keep your eye out there on XAware.org for future sessions and for the recorded versions. Thank you.